Hello and welcome to the latest installment in Helix Education's webinar series on the COVID-19 Roadmap to Fall 2020. Today we're talking about the must-haves for successful operations as it relates to our pillar of online institutional readiness. Hello everybody, thanks again for joining us. My name is Sparky Mortimer. I'm the Associate Director of Creative Strategy here at Helix Education, and I'm going to be moderating our conversation today. If you've joined us for any of our previous webinars, you know the routine. For those of you that have not, just a couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording this webinar. We'll be posting it to our Helix Education YouTube channel, as well as sending a link to that YouTube video to all of you who are attending today. And we're also using a live transcript service called Otter AI. You'll find a link to that transcript in the chat. And so if you'd like to take advantage of that feature, you're welcome to do so by clicking the link in the chat. Also, we will have a Q&A portion to our discussion today. At any time during the webinar, you can use that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Click that and type in your question. You don't have to wait for the Q&A section in order to submit your question. And I know we've got some questions already in the queue, so thanks to everybody who has already submitted questions for us today. And so I'd like to introduce our speakers, two folks that I've had the pleasure of working with for a long time at Helix Education. The first is Adam Hilton. He is our Vice President for Partner Engagement, 10 plus years. Developing and executing marketing strategy. I've worked with Adam pretty much the whole time I've been here at Helix Education. We've worked on a lot of different campaigns together, but Adam's done more than just education. He's also had worked with clients such as Novartis, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson. Higher education, though, he's spent 7 years in the higher ed space, something that is really near and dear to him, helping to establish these really deep and mutually beneficial partnerships. And so that's a lot of what we'll talk about today. Adam has degrees from the University of Utah, as well as Northwestern University for his master's. So Adam, thank you for joining us. And our most frequent presenter so far in our webinar series has been Cherron Hoppes, our Vice President and Chief Academic Officer. If you haven't had the pleasure of hearing Cherron during this webinar series, you're in for a great treat, bringing multiple decades of higher education experience across so many different roles: student affairs, faculty, academic administration, accreditation. And so this idea of successful operations, she's able to tackle this from so many different perspectives because of her varied experience, including her most recent role before Helix Education as Dean of the Undergraduate Programs at Golden Gate University. Cherron also brings a master's from New Mexico State and a doctorate from the University of Alabama. And so with that, Cherron, I'm going to turn the time over to you to start a discussion on the must-haves for successful operations. Cherron, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sparky, and very special thanks to my friend and colleague Adam Hilton for joining us today. We really wanted to walk away with some very tangible things for you all at the back end of this. One is we want to really explore what are those must-haves? What are the things institutions need to be thinking about as they think about a shift, whether it's pursuing very purposefully an online enrollment strategy, or even if it's how to address what's happening on our campuses in light of COVID-19, and what are those musts that need to happen. We want to talk a little bit about, given our collective experience in working with institutions, what are the stumbling blocks that institutions most often hit, and how might we think about avoiding those up front? And then finally, really thinking about an action plan for operational continuous improvement. This is going to be one of those things that's definitely not a one and done. As the needs of your students, as your technologies, all of those things shift, you're going to want to always be in the mode of how could we do this better? And so really thinking about what that action plan might be. So to do that, though, I want to set a little bit of context. We've talked about this before, but just to touch base again on what these unprecedented circumstances have brought to us and why this conversation is so timely. And then, speaking of conversations, we want to just have one with you all and with one another, talking about those must-haves. And so, as Sparky mentioned, please take advantage of the Q&A. We do have some questions that were sent in ahead of time, but we would love to have you participate with us. So feel free to just shoot those in that Q&A space, and Sparky will help us make sure that we're getting everything addressed. And I want to wrap with the 4 pillars of quality online education. This is really the foundational belief structure that we at Helix hold about how to create an online experience that is of high quality and high value to our students. And with that, we want to talk about how we can help. We have a number of tools and things that we are openly sharing with our higher ed community and our friends there, but we also want to be available for questions and support as you all are making some of these absolutely critical decisions as August and September get all that much closer. So what we've done is create kind of a journey that where each week we're talking about a different pillar. And right now we're looking at the week of June 29th. I cannot believe that this is our last June event for our future in higher education, but we are coming to the end of this part of our journey. We'll talk more about what's to come, but today's focus is really going to be on that broader spectrum of institutional online readiness. What are the policies, practices, considerations across the board at your institution that you want to be paying particularly close attention to? So here's our unprecedented circumstances. It feels a little bit like we've been at this so long that it's starting to oddly feel more normal than not, which is a little concerning. But I think the reality of it is that we are still facing a tremendous amount of uncertainty. If you all haven't accessed this, the Chronicle of Higher Ed has a great resource that is truly a living, active resource. As institutions are announcing their plans for the fall, they've created essentially a database of individual institutions and the decisions that they're making, and then provide this live update. So this was just as a couple of hours ago. You can see that there's still a number of institutions that are planning for in-person come this fall. I think it'll be interesting to see where this sits in a week to 10 days from now, particularly given the latest statistics for a number of states where we're seeing cases of COVID-19 rapidly increase again. And what does that mean for institutional decisions? We're seeing all kinds of things, from hybrid models to new term structures to a concept of wrapping everything by Thanksgiving, although that's an interesting one because that assumes that COVID likes our calendars. And I think we've proven that that may not necessarily be the case. But this is a great way to just see how in flux our entire community is. Our friends at Phil on EdTech put together this great resource to kind of visualize what we've been through. You know, there was kind of the pre-world where online was part of our paradigm. And for those of us who have been working in online for a number of years, this was really where we spent our time and effort. But collectively in higher ed, it was kind of that other program or that other modality. But what we saw in February and March into later in the spring was that it became a necessity for crisis planning. And in crisis planning, there's a lot of steps that were missed. And with that was this idea that we're going to immediately move things online, in some cases with less than 48 hours notice. And it really put us in a position of remote emergency teaching, which is a very, very different thing from the time and intentionality that really needs to come behind a quality online design for that learning experience for your students. But now as we flow through the rest of summer and looking forward to the fall, I think all of us are seeing the transition possibilities and what else it's going to take for us to be successful. And I also think that this changes the dialogue about online learning. Hopefully not in saying that what we experienced in spring 2020 is a representative of all online learning, but rather we know some things that worked. We understand how we need to adjust our teaching and learning structures and our institutional structures, and now we're going to commit the time and resources to do this as a high quality way, and that will really lead us to this new future in higher education. And I want to talk a minute just about that distinction between the emergency remote learning to really quality online learning. And that whole concept underlying this around the need for time and intentionality for really good design and course build is absolutely imperative. I think some positive things happened, but I hope that that's not the standard bearer. But I also hope through all of this, we recognize that regardless of what happens with COVID, if it disappears tomorrow, we're going to still need to understand online operations at this highest level and online teaching and learning, because this should become our reality, if for nothing else, for crisis contingency planning. And I think that if we hear from our colleagues from, you know, the areas hit by Katrina and by Sandy, those institutions were much more prepared than those of us who have not had to face significant closure as a result of some impact of Mother Nature. And so this really is going to become our norm. Even if we get back to more campus-based and campus-oriented environments, we need to always consider design intentionally for that flexibility and what that looks like. And here's what we do know. Zoom and conferencing are fabulous, but they're exhausting hour after hour and day after day. And so it really takes it emphasizes the need for us to think about other forms of medium, other forms of resources to bring students together and to share information. The other reality of it is that fully synchronous modeling just is not practical. As we think about the digital divide, we think about challenges with bandwidth and hardware that our students are experiencing as they went back home, or even the difference in time zones. You know, if I'm living in the East Coast and taking a class at 8 o'clock in the morning, that's doable. If my home is in Pacific time, that's a little bit more painful to think about how I'm going to manage that schedule. So really opening us up to a conversation about what's appropriate for synchronous and asynchronous learning as well. So as we think about this context, we're going to kind of step into this idea of what are the must-haves at a higher level operationally. And so I'm going to stop screen sharing, if I can find the right button here, and open that conversation up to Adam Hilton. Adam, you've done some amazing work with the Helix partners around what we call operational mandatories and considerations. And I'd love to really hear from you. What led us as an organization to think about documenting these things in support of our institutional partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you mentioned the document. I've spent quite a bit of time with it. You know, it's been incredibly helpful for us, you know, over the course of the years. I think early on in partnerships and things like that, where we, you know, brought on new partners. I think we've just seen over the course of time that there are certain things that ultimately will keep you from being successful. You know, no matter how great the marketing is, no matter how many, you know, inquiries and things you're generating, if at the end of the day, you know, we can't get students admitted, we can't get students, you know, packaged, we can't get students moved through the funnel, you know, we have a difficult time being successful, both, you know, Helix and the partner. And so I think that's kind of the real driver behind developing the best practices document, is that, you know, and at this point now they're even contractual in some cases, where we say, look, these are so critical to the partnership and the success of our partnership that we include them in the contract, because, you know, around SLAs, turnaround times, you know, especially where, you know, so much of what we do is adult and online, non-traditional. Some of these things are critical, you know, getting students moved through those funnels. There are other institutions that will move quickly. And so if we're not one of them, you know, they've got other options and they'll move elsewhere. And we've seen that happen, you know, late funnel melt where, you know, students aren't able to get what they need. So that was kind of the real driver behind developing, you know, the best practice for us.
So Adam, you know, it's interesting because in our work, we've long been focused on the adult and graduate professional online audience, which is going to be very different in terms of their behavior and their expectations from a more traditional campus environment. When you think about our work, what do you think some of the most important things would be to bear in mind if I'm at an institution that's primarily residential, dealing with new high school graduates or transfers out of community college? What are some of those principles that we hold so important for our adult and online work for this particular population?
Yeah, I think for me, you know, one of the critical pieces, and I don't know that, you know, my experience has been that, you know, there are institutions that do it well, but it's that whole concept of kind of engagement. You know, you do outreach, you spend, you know, some institutions spend a crazy amount of money on advertising and marketing and kind of inquiry generation. But as you bring students in, I think where a lot of institutions fall short is that dialogue and that engagement with those students at the point that you've already got them to, you know, raise their hand, they've expressed interest, you've got them to a point where they've started an application or they, you know, have even completed an application, but getting them all the way through to be admitted, to get registered, and actually to show up to class on the first day, I think is important. We do a lot of that at Helix on behalf of partners that we have. And I think, you know, both the frequency of outreach as well as the relevancy. So how frequent are you reaching out to these students, and how relevant is the message that you're using? You know, I know years ago we had done some research on with talking to students to find out, and I think every institution could probably do that if they, you know, did a survey with their student body to say, you know, what are some of the hurdles that you face, right? We talked to students who ultimately didn't convert and who didn't end up starting to say, hey, you know, what are the concerns you have? And I think that they do at different points in time, they face different concerns, whether it's financial, whether it's, you know, I've got children, what am I going to do with my children while I'm studying, those kinds of things. But these things come up at different points in time. And so we've kind of built a cadence that not only do we think it's the right number of touches, the right medium, you know, whether it's email, phone calls, direct mail, whatever it might be, but also relevant messaging. So you're addressing specific concerns at specific times throughout that process. When you look at traditional students, I think oftentimes, you know, if you're talking to students that are still, if it's traditional undergraduate and you're talking to students that are still in high school, you might be talking to them in the fall, they graduate in the spring. You know, for us with adult and online, oftentimes you talk to students who can start next month or in 2 months from now. But if you're talking to a traditional, you know, a high school student for traditional undergraduate and they are not ready, they will not be able to enroll for another, you know, 9 months. You have a pretty significant period of time there where you have to continue to engage, to keep them interested, to keep them going. And so I think that becomes even more important for, you know, that traditional population.
Well, and I think certainly we'll get into the 4 pillars a little bit later in this, but for those of you who have been following, one of our pillars is around setting student and parent expectations. And I think to Adam's point, that connection is absolutely critical. And to do it in a very personalized, relevant, trust-building way is how you're going to keep both your potential new students and your continuing students engaged with you, because that level of connection, we all need it right now, right? I think it's even more important now than ever, and to develop a messaging cadence that builds confidence and builds trust and brings clarity where there is, and is really transparent where there isn't yet. And what students and families can expect around that. So I think that's a really, really great point. In your work with partners and with institutions over this time span, Adam, what do you think the top 3 critical things are that institutions have to pay attention to from day one?
So I would say that's a great question. I would say, you know, I would even take it a step back in terms of program selection. You know, for me, it's not so much, you know, we do a lot of program feasibility studies, right? So we look at demand, we look at, you know, what kind of interest might there be, how many, you know, what type of enrollment do we think we can generate, what types of employment opportunities exist for students that graduate from a program like this. But I would say, you know, even separate from the program feasibility study, we're looking internally at the institution. And when you're selecting a program, you know, I would think and I would imagine that within every institution, it's almost like you're trying to tell a story with the portfolio that you have, right? Every university is unique. Every university has its own strengths, whether it's a specific college or school within the institution that they are well known for, or that they have really strong faculty in. But I think it's first of all, just program selection and identifying, you know, what programs really truly make sense for our institution to offer, and can we make it work and make it work well, based on the faculty we have and the other programs and things that we offer. The second part of that would be obviously curriculum development, being thoughtful about, you know, developing a good curriculum that can be well taught online and can be well received online, is really critical. I realized that, you know, in the spring, when this virus came about, that was a difficult thing for people to manage. You know, like you said, I think you said 48 hours, nobody's thoughtfully developing a curriculum in 48 hours. But I think now, you know, as we've had the summer going into fall, you know, a lot of our institutions and the partners we work with are saying, look, we would really like to be, you know, on campus, but we are also preparing for the fact that we may not be. And so they have spent a significant amount of time and effort trying to develop, where, you know, back in the spring and even in summer, it may have been, you know, a Zoom call here and there, and trying their best to make it, you know, remote, like I think you called it remote emergency, you know, learning or, you know, technology assisted learning, whatever you want to call it, versus true online learning. I think a really well thought through and developed curriculum that can be well taught and well received online is important. And then I think the third is, setting an appropriate price point, but also admissions requirements. I think that's something that we have seen over and over and over again, where, we've done a lot of work, an awful lot of work on, admission requirement comparisons. We've looked at individual programs for partners and then taken, local, regional, national looks at what are other institutions requiring. And I think a robust set of admission requirement is wonderful, but I do think that in some cases you can overqualify to a point where you will lose out on students who are indeed qualified, but we've got such an extensive list of requirements that we lose folks to institutions that don't ask for so much, but the outcomes are the same and they're a very qualified student. So I would say, again, the program selection and how it fits within your institution and your portfolio and your strengths. The second would be, kind of curriculum development, and is it well taught and well received online? And then the third is, being thoughtful about an appropriate price point and set of admissions criteria.
That's great. And actually, to your second point, Adam, we had one of our registration folks at the time of registration submitted a question to us and says, I'm interested in establishing a continuous improvement protocol at the graduate and PhD level to ensure that the quality of the program and potential of the graduates to succeed improves consistently over time. And so I think for us, this is really about making sure that you've got a very clear set of outcomes for your programs, that you link those outcomes directly to the appropriate pathways to jobs that connect. We use a great tool through Burning Glass. We also look at Bureau of Labor Statistics information to really understand those skill sets and how they might align to programs. Using the Department of Labor structure of the SIP codes, I think that's kind of the connective tissue back to academic programming. So understanding those skills, understanding how those skills are demonstrated in your programmatic outcomes, but even more so at the course level, what might be happening as an artifact of student work product that definitely demonstrates that those skills are being developed. And even more so in the conversation we have with students, that they understand the why, right? I'm not giving you this case study, or I'm not giving you this research project just because you need to have had case studies and research projects, but because when you complete this, you're going to be able to demonstrate competitively to your future employers how that skill set was developed and how you performed to that level. And I think really the idea of, an assessment gets a bad rap in higher education, but it really is valuable because that's the place where we create a framework of the learning experience, of the expected outcomes, how students are performing against those expectations, but even more so, opening up a conversation about what we as educators need to do better, right? Oftentimes you might find in a programmatic assessment that it's not necessarily the student performance that's a problem, it's actually the tool that you're using to assess them, right? So really allowing yourself to look at the full breadth of what's contributing to student performance in those outcomes. And then there's also some real basic opportunities as well. So we've created a course rubric that you can find on our website, and we'll share that URL with you. But that really is an opportunity at the learning experience level in your design to make sure that you are doing the things necessary to create a very positive experience so students can focus on the content and their learning and their demonstration of learning, rather than what it means to try to work their way through that online experience. And so having a framework to really start from, and then setting goals annually, meeting with faculty, bringing the community together to talk about those outcomes, to figure out the low-hanging fruit and figure out the longer-term projects and just start chipping away at it. This is a job that should never be done, that should just be a part of how you're working in the academic space. So I know that's a big answer to that question, but I hope that gives you some insight on some ways you might think about tackling a continuous improvement project for your program. So thank you to whoever sent that in. We appreciate you very much. Adam, one of the things that we spend a lot of time is talking about the institutional kind of operational structures of things. But certainly I, in my work as the CAO, and I think all of us experience this, at some point, if faculty are not at the table, don't understand why we're doing the things we're doing, and aren't a part of the conversation to advance the online kind of goals and strategies for the institution, then we're missing out on an important piece of all of this. So in your experience, when's the right time, and what's the right kind of conversation to make sure that faculty are in and understand what all of this work might be at the kind of operational speed to lead marketing perspective? Where should they come in at?
So great question again. I don't think you can overstate the importance of faculty in this process. I think we've over the years, seen faculty become involved at different points in time throughout the process of launching. And I think for me, I would say the sooner, I know it's not, the sooner the better, in my opinion. We've had, situations where at the very, very onset of these conversations, faculty is involved. And I think it's really important. Again, we've got partners who have launched online, and I think it is a very different, it's different. The online environment is different. I think that, oftentimes these faculty members have come accustomed to a very, tangible, relationship and interaction with their students. And then all of a sudden you start offering online, and you've got students across the country or, that are somewhat out of reach. And it's like, how do you maintain that same level of interaction and communication with students that are now online? I think, oftentimes faculty see that, and it becomes a frustration for them. But so I think the sooner you can get them involved, I think the better off you're going to be. They're ultimately the ones, I think for us, we've even gone as far as to say, in some of our initial outreach, we talked about, the engagement piece with these students, but even getting faculty involved in that as soon as a student has inquired. Yeah. I think it makes a huge difference if you can find a way to incorporate outreach from faculty members to say, hey, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you first day of class, or, whatever it might be. It's made a huge difference. We've done an awful lot of testing in that, that engagement cadence, if you will. And I think the most success we've had is in situations where we have partnered with faculty to say, here's what we would love from you. What are your thoughts on this? And sometimes it's video, short video, welcome video. Sometimes it's a letter. Sometimes it's a, whatever it might be. But outreach from faculty early on is so, so critical. And I think we've seen better conversion through the funnel in situations where we've involved faculty, but also certainly retention. Interestingly, when students start, if they've had, a fair amount of involvement and a fair amount of interaction with faculty prior, they are more likely to retain afterwards. So I think the sooner you can get faculty involved, without question, the better off you are.
And I have to completely agree with you. A few weeks ago, Brian Burke from Murray State joined me for a conversation about student affairs and academic affairs in this online world. And one of the things he did was kind of say that we're almost reconnecting back to 19th century higher education, in that during that time in higher ed, faculty were the end all be all. They were the dean of students. They were the folks who were really the front lines. And I think that it's easy to forget that for an online student who will most likely never step foot on your campus, the faculty that they have in their online classrooms are the face of the institution in ways that are important in traditional residential models, but there's not the totality of that whole experience, right? So that faculty connection, the opportunity to know who your faculty are and to feel like that's a real anchor to what the institution represents, I think is a great opportunity. So having your faculty at the table as you're talking about shifts to this online environment and this online strategy, I think is really critical, because they're going to be the voice of it when you move that direction. So one of our guests, Joseph O'Brien, sent in a question to the chat. And he says, Adam, when you speak of identifying programs that work for your college, are you also suggesting that colleges should reduce or eliminate programs they're not strong in?
So also a great question. Yes, so I do think I am suggesting that. It's one of those things, we look at it, and I don't know, how much is kind of widely known about kind of Helix and how things are structured on our end and how we work. But, we're constantly evaluating the managed program portfolio on our side. So the programs that we're responsible for, marketing, enrolling for, doing success coaching and retaining for, we're constantly evaluating that portfolio, and our partners are as well. In fact, I just got a request last week from a partner of ours saying, hey, can you send us some detail around cost per starts and things like that for these different programs, because we'd like to evaluate it. Are we offering the right types of programs? I've not personally, I've not been in faculty, I've not been in institutional leadership to make those decisions, but I think in many cases they're painful sometimes decisions to make. But I think that you are always, rather than kind of running with a program that, just because, or we put, so much time in getting this program live, if it's not performing and it's not driving the results you want, as painful as it might be, I do think that you're better off, making the adjustment there and pivoting and kind of moving in a different direction. And we, again, even on our end, we're ultimately not the decision makers on a lot of that, but we provide a lot of input to our partner institutions to say, hey, these programs, here's what we've done. Here's the types of marketing we've done. Here's the types of students we're reaching out to, all these things. And our cost per starts, X, it's 3 times what we'd like it to be. And we're having a really hard time, driving enrollment for this program. And so let's take a look at it and decide if that's something we want to continue to offer. So I do think that it is, that evaluation is very comprehensive, and it's not just, what new programs should we offer and how do those fit within our current portfolio, but it is what programs are we currently offering that may not make sense for us to continue with.
Yeah. So I have to say, in all of my years on a campus, I was part of a major realignment of all of the programs that were being offered at the institution I was working at. And that has to be one of the most difficult processes that I've ever been through and have ever seen my faculty colleagues go through, because it really is, it is painful, because it's not just the program or the discipline, it's the people connected to it that you have to make some vital decisions about. But I will say, on the flip side, for the institution, having that level of focus and clarity about how you're represented in the higher education community is going to do nothing but bring distinction to how you can tell your story and how clear your story can be told in a very mucky, cloudy kind of cacophony of voices around all these institutions. And so I think it is important for institutions to have real defined structure around their mission and their values and their place in the higher ed landscape, and then make programmatic decisions accordingly. That is going to be an imperative. And that doesn't mean that every program needs to kind of float on its own from a financial perspective. An institution may decide something is so critical to their mission that they're willing to, have whatever lower expectations around enrollments they need to for that. But we just have to be really clear about it, because this is not an area where miracles get to be performed. Just because you like a program or think it's important doesn't mean that students are going to come in droves. And I think when everyone is clear about that, then it allows the institution to be much more successful overall in its operational efforts. So yeah, but it is never an easy conversation. You hit that one on the head, Adam. Sparky, have we had any other questions or comments come in at this point?
We haven't had any in the Q&A yet. So if you joined us a little bit late, that's okay. Use that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen to be able to type in a question anytime. You can also use the chat if you'd like Joseph did. Joseph, thank you for submitting that question. And so feel free to ask away. But Cherron, I know we had some other questions come in beforehand, so I think you can keep going with those for the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam, it always, whenever I'm on campuses and consulting, there's always that moment where I think, I've been doing this for 30 years, nothing surprises me anymore. And then I'll go to a campus who still in, 2020 is having students required to get wet signatures at the registrar's office to drop a class, or from an advisor or something like that. When you think about your work with partners and at these institutions, what are a couple of the things where you wish that you could whisper in institutional leadership's ear, don't forget this one because it's so important, but oftentimes it's overlooked? Are there any of those items for you?
Sure. Yeah, I think, and again, I don't know that this one's a huge surprise, but I do think, and granted, I'm biased. Most of my career in higher ed has been online. in terms of kind of the focus for recruitment and everything else. But I do think that, the mistake that sometimes is made is that, I think treating online as somewhat of an add-on. I think that it can't be treated that way. I realize that, in many cases, right, the bread and butter of the institution is likely, campus-based and even traditional, undergraduate campus-based, and that's okay. But I think anytime you set it up to where you're planning to bring online and just have it be an add-on, what do I mean by that? I think, oftentimes folks look at their, their enrollment coaching staff, they look at their financial aid staff, they look at their admission staff, and the thought is, well, look, we've got these people here, we'll add online, and we can have these people kind of tackle both, and it'll be fine. And I think that, if it's being done right from a marketing, from an inquiry generation perspective, the goal is that you will get incremental students from online. You're not just taking your population and splitting it between online and campus. You're actually generating incremental enrollment for online. And the biggest mistake that I see made is, and we see it, you talked about the best practices document. The reason that we push so hard on, turnaround times and SLAs for the partnership is because we start to hit major bottlenecks in the process where we're generating, a lot of inquiries, and we're getting a lot of students in, we're getting a lot of, submitted applications, completed applications, and then it's a huge bottleneck at registration or admissions decision, right? And it's where we think it should be 24 to 48 hours. It's, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days that these students are waiting to get admission decisions back. And it creates issue. I think registration and financial aid are two areas where, we see, somewhat of a bottleneck. And I think oftentimes it's because from a staffing perspective, the thought was, it's fine. We'll just kind of dual purpose these folks. In some cases, you're offering the same program online that you're offering on campus. And the thought is it's the same program. Our coaches can tackle both. And I think trying to repurpose or add to, unless your staff is very underutilized, I think thinking that you'll just add online and just, spread that work out amongst those that you have, you'll start to see bottlenecks and you start to see issues. I think it has to be treated and staffed appropriately to make it really work the way that you'd like it to. So that's one that I see time and time again. You talk to, staff, folks on staff that are like, man, I'm a team of one, and I'm trying to process all of these applications, and I'm also trying to process all of these, and I just can't get through them all quickly enough. And we start to see we melt, 15, 20, 25%, right, days before start because students can't get packaged and concerned about whether or not they're going to get the money that they need. And so we start to melt late in the funnel because of things like that. So that's a big one for me.
Well, and, and I think you speak so much truth, even in the early days. I started out in more residential, traditional campus environments. And I remember conversations in, the mid 90s, early 2000s about either taking on adult programs or later taking on online programs. And the idea was that they were going to bring in the money, right? And so there were not considerations that if you have adult students who are working from 8 to 5, you need to be thinking about office hours differently and available staff to support them in those off hours, or sufficient self-service tools that they can get through much of what they need to do online. And so, one of the things I would encourage you all to take a look at, if you haven't yet, is on our website, The New Future in Higher Education, we've got a rubric that we really kind of break out some of those most critical things, whether it's operational and student services, whether it's policy. You would be surprised how many student codes of conduct have nothing about expectations for engagement in online communications with one another, right? So just a checklist to kind of help institutions think about, is this the bolt-on that kind of sits in the other room, or is this really going to be part of our overall campus culture?
Yeah, and I think it's a frustration for faculty as well. I think a lot of times, faculty, obviously take pride in the work they're doing. And again, I think a lot of these faculty members really would like to have a high touch, kind of high involvement, and they see more success from students that way. But when you start adding all these online students in the mix, it becomes a frustration for them because they, in some cases it's new, but in many cases they still want to maintain that same level of involvement and hands-on and help. And I'm sure it benefits the student, but when they've got so many students coming in, From a combination of campus-based and online, it becomes overwhelming for them, and I think it creates frustration.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anything else from our audience, Sparky?
Yeah, so Joseph has a follow-up question. He says, this may be too removed from the admin and faculty involvement in moving to online, but what's recommended for training admission staff to address students, parents, and guidance counselors looking at college as high school juniors and seniors? So I know we've talked about that as one of our pillars of quality online learning that we'll talk about a little bit later, is student and parent expectation management. And so Cherron and Adam, what are some recommendations that you would make in terms of training admissions and enrollment staff to help address those concerns?
Well, I'll jump in, because I would say that the thing that I have found to be most successful in a variety of institutional contexts is to train your staff, particularly around admissions and student success staff, to approach the relationship with a student as a coaching relationship. And we have some great tools under our student engagement pillar that really outlines the model that we use around coaching. This idea of developing rapport, about engaging students, supporting them, and quite frankly, in the online environment, selling. Because every registration term is an opportunity for the student to make a choice to go someplace else. And so really using that coaching model and structures, and you'll have a chance to access the training tools that we use for our own enrollment and success coaches by tapping into that website. So we'll share that with you as well. But I think kind of going into it with that philosophy, that their role is to coach students to success through the enrollment funnel, success through their time as a student to graduation, really changes the orientation of how those conversations go. Adam, do you have any additional thoughts about that, or maybe how our partners respond to that coaching model?
Yeah, we've seen good success with kind of the RISE coaching model. I think in one of the prior webinars, Miranda also, I think it's been in a couple of the webinars, but I go back to kind of communication and honestly expectation setting. I think that is such a critical part of that coaching, to make sure that, again, going back to the whole engagement, that it's timely, it's relevant, but that there are really clear expectations being set. And I've seen that to be true, not only with, Joseph's question around, high school juniors and seniors, but adult learners as well. I think everybody, this is new enough to enough people that this process can become incredibly overwhelming. And I think that the more clearly an institution can communicate to them, again, frequency, relevancy, and then kind of expectation setting, you will be so much better off. And where you're out, spending the money in marketing, it's almost one of those things where it just is a no-brainer. You've already spent the marketing money. You've already brought these inquiries and these potential students in, to invest a little bit more money in a really good, thoughtful engagement cadence and kind of expectation setting is so worthwhile. I don't think you can say it enough. I really, really, really do believe that is so incredibly important. And I think our coaches do a good job. It's a combination of, as Cherron, it's a combination of, we have, enrollment coaches doing outreach. We have, success coaches at the point that these students are enrolled and now into their journey. We have success coaching reaching out, but early on, before they're even enrolled and they've been handed to an enrollment coach, we have engagement going out from our marketing team. So at every point from the initial point of inquiry all the way through graduation, we have a very thoughtful, well-timed, relevant, setting clear expectation cadence that's administered out. And I think it makes a huge difference.
Thank you so much, Adam. I appreciate this conversation, and anytime that you and I get to visit like this, shockingly enough, we don't get to do it often enough. So we want to thank our audience for joining us for this. I do want to share with you all, one of the promises that I made was about the 4 pillars for Helix Education, and how Helix can help as we move forward. So if you have any additional questions as we're moving through this, please feel free to jump right in. That Q&A period doesn't end here, and we will look to wrap this up. So as we talked about our extensive experience in supporting institutions as they enroll online, and adult students in particular, we thought about what does this new world mean? And how can we take our experiences and help our colleagues in higher ed. So we put things together in what we're calling the 4 pillars to transition to quality online education. And as you've heard us talk about, much of the institutional readiness really branches across all 4 of those pillars. And so our hope is that you find information in each one of them that really helps you and your institution as you're making the decisions you need to make for moving forward. So the bigger question is how can Helix help? Well, we have probably 30 plus years experience in our outsourced program management model and in partnering with institutions on the ground and online and helping them move forward. And as you can imagine, in those kinds of deep partnerships, we've learned a whole lot, and we've had some bumps and bruises along the way. But in the end of it, we're really trying to figure out the best way to support our institutional partnerships. And we wanted to bring that information and experience to you. So what we've done is taken all of this within the 4 pillars and created a number of free resources. They are ready for you at the website. We've got rubrics, templates, webinars. We've got podcasts around these subjects. We're sharing with you the training that we actually give to our own staff. So feel free to partake of that. And then certainly as you're thinking about each piece of these 4 pillars, we've got expertise within the Helix umbrella that would be happy to help have a conversation or follow up with you if there are more questions that you have or more support that you need. And each of these are kind of highlighted on that website, so you can actually target and attack whatever area of interest that you might have in terms of those resources. And we've had this journey throughout the summer, and we plan to continue it as long as there's an interest in helping you all. So as you know, this week we talked about institutional online readiness. Next week, I'm going to be hosting another webinar with a colleague of mine, Chris Edwards from MindEdge. They're a online content provider, and we're going to be talking about the National Institute of Online Learning and another avenue for us to have a broader conversation about how do we bring best practice and resource to institutions. So I hope you'll plan on joining me next week. We'll be sharing that information very shortly. But just because our graphic kind of ends at July 6th doesn't mean that we want to. And so Sparky, I'm going to ask you to tell them a little bit about what we're doing right now.
All right, absolutely, yeah. And so like Cherron said, this is something that we want to continue as long as there's a need. And as the pandemic continues to evolve and to shift, that need is going to continue to be there. And so we want your help in selecting future topics for webinars, as well as just kind of sharing with us what you're enjoying about these webinars and how we can continue to make them better. And so we've created a Survey Monkey. You can see the link right there on the side. We've also provided that in the chat as well. And so you can take that short survey, just a few questions. And like I said, tell us what's working, how we can do better, and share any topics that you would like for us to talk about. And then if you complete that survey no later than July 2nd, you'll be entered into a drawing to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So do it now before the holiday weekend, and then that can become the basis for us to share additional webinars on topics that are of interest to you. So again, we've got the link there in the chat. Take it by July 2nd. So that's what, this Thursday? So take it by this Thursday. You'll be entered in a drawing for that $50 Amazon gift card. And so we hope that these have been beneficial for you so far. And we want to continue to focus on topics that matter most to you as you transition to quality online learning for fall 2020.
Thank you, Sparky. And so, you know, in terms of what you can expect from us, we have the URL here for our what we're calling the new future in higher education. And that's going to be exactly where you find the 4 pillars and all the resources we put together. We've also created an email address. So for any of you that have questions or would like to get more information about the tools and resources that are there, please don't hesitate. newfutureinfo@helixeducation.com. Absolutely a place that you can come to and really dive into this stuff deeper with any of us on the team. So our hope is that today we've hit the goals that we strive to hit, and we appreciate your time and being a part of this conversation. We enjoy having the opportunity to share our work with you and look forward to hearing more back from you. So thank you very much, Sparky. If you want to get us wrapped up, we can go from here and actually give everybody a little bit of time back.
Hey, there you go. That's right. So once again, we're going to be posting the recording to this webinar on our Helix Education YouTube channel, as well as on that New Future website, helixeducation.com/new-future. Plenty of resources available there, as Cherron recapped. And if you have further questions beyond what we've already talked about today, go ahead and send us an email at newfutureinfo@helixeducation.com. And then, like I said, be on the lookout for an email with the link to the YouTube channel, as well as we're going to include a link to that survey as well in that follow-up email. So if you haven't clicked it already in the chat, you'll be able to click it out of that email and submit future topics for us to consider. So thanks everybody for joining us today. Thanks for the questions that we've received. Cherron and Adam, thank you so much for joining us and for your perspective and expertise. Yeah, we'll give you a little bit of time back in your day. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day and week, and especially that you have a safe and happy Independence Day holiday weekend. Thanks everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
You know.
Bye-bye.